I still remember the fluorescent lights buzzing above me as I stood in the school auditorium, clutching the sign-up sheet for the annual talent show. My hands trembled, not from nerves about performing, but from the echo of words I had overheard just minutes earlier. She shouldn't even bother, a girl whispered to her friend, her voice sharp enough to cut through the chatter. She's too ugly for the stage. No one wants to watch her. The phrase clung to me like gum stuck to a shoe. Messy, humiliating, impossible to shake off. Too ugly. It wasn't the first time I'd heard something like that, but somehow the cruelty felt louder that day. Maybe because the auditorium was filled with laughter and easy confidence from people who seemed to belong, while I stood there wondering if I'd made a mistake signing up. I pulled my jacket tighter around me. It was oversized, a dull shade of gray, the kind of thing people teased me about because it hid everything, my arms, my shape, even my posture. But that jacket had become my shield, my way of disappearing in plain sight. Nobody noticed what was underneath, and I had convinced myself that was safer. Still, the thought of performing tugged at me like a stubborn thread. I had practiced for weeks in my bedroom, rehearsing until the walls themselves seemed to hum with the melody. The song wasn't just notes and lyrics, it was a piece of me I had never shown anyone. And as much as I wanted to hide, some small, stubborn part of me refused to let those words, too ugly, decide my place. That night, as the curtain prepared to rise and my name was called, I kept my jacket zipped up. The spotlight blinded me. The crowd was just a blur of faces. My knees wobbled, my throat tightened. And then, as the first notes left my lips, something inside me shifted. What no one knew, what even I barely believed, was that before the song ended, I would unzip that gray jacket. And when I did, the entire auditorium would rise to its feet. Because sometimes the ugliest words we hear become the spark for the most unexpected transformation. Kindness, I would later realize, often begins with the courage to be seen. The stage lights were still warm on my skin when I stumbled off, my jacket pulled close again like a secret. Applause still rang in my ears, but I didn't dare let myself believe it had been for me. I walked quickly, afraid that if I slowed down, someone would laugh and tell me it was all a mistake. Backstage, the chatter of performers swirled around me, guitar cases snapping shut, dancers in glittery costumes adjusting their hair, a boy juggling 3 baseballs just because he could. I found a quiet corner near the heavy velvet curtains and pressed my back against the wall, my heart still drumming in uneven beats. This wasn't how the story usually went for me. Most of the time, I was invisible. The girl who slipped into class unnoticed, who avoided mirrors, who ate lunch on the far side of the cafeteria because it was easier than pretending I belonged. My jacket had become part of that invisibility. People laughed at it, sure, but it also made them stop asking questions. And in some strange way, that was safer than being seen. But now there was no hiding from what had just happened. A moment ago, under those harsh stage lights, I had felt something shift, not just in me, but in the room itself. The music had carried me to a place where their words couldn't reach. And then, when I'd unzipped my jacket, it was like a curtain lifting, not just from my body but from my whole life. Of course, that wasn't how I had planned it. I hadn't even been sure I would go through with it. But standing there, singing words I had whispered to myself in the dark, I realized I couldn't stay hidden forever. Still, one question clawed at me. Was that standing ovation real, or was it just politeness, a kind of pity clap? Because if it was pity, I wasn't sure I could bear it. That night after the show, when my classmates' laughter still echoed faintly in my memory, I folded the gray jacket neatly on my bed. For the first time in years, I thought about what it might mean to leave it behind. But in our town, nothing stays secret for long. And soon, I would learn that taking off the jacket was only the beginning of the test. Because some people weren't ready to let me step into the light. Sometimes the hardest part of courage isn't the first step, it's everything that comes after. The following Monday at school, I could feel the shift before anyone said a word. The hallways had a rhythm I knew well, the scrape of lockers, the rush of sneakers, the laughter that always seemed to have an edge. But that morning, the laughter wasn't about me. At least, not in the way I expected. Instead of whispers about my jacket or my face, I caught fragments of a new story. Did you see her? I didn't even know she could sing like that. Was that really her? It was dizzying. For years I had trained myself to shrink, to expect ridicule as naturally as breathing. And now, suddenly, I was visible in a way I had never been before. People looked at me with curiosity, even admiration. And that, strangely, was more frightening than their cruelty had ever been. But then came the other voice, the one I had always dreaded. It was Amanda, the same girl who had hissed, "Too ugly for the stage," before the talent show. She didn't whisper this time. She said it loud enough for the crowd around her to hear. Please. She only got applause because people felt sorry for her. It's not like talent can erase what's obvious. The sting was immediate, sharper than the praise had been sweet. Because in that moment, I realized the applause hadn't ended the test. It had only started it. I went home that day and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the folded jacket. That jacket wasn't just fabric. It had been my armor, my way of surviving. Without it, I felt exposed, vulnerable. And yet, something inside me whispered that I couldn't put it back on. Not after everything. So I made a quiet promise to myself. I would prove that what I had was not pity applause. I would prove that taking off the jacket had been more than a desperate act. I would enter the next round of auditions, this time for the Regional Talent Showcase. But there were rules, both spoken and unspoken. Rule 1. I couldn't hide. Not behind a jacket. Not behind silence. Rule 2. I had to perform in front of strangers, people who didn't know me, who couldn't be swayed by pity or gossip. Rule 3. No matter what Amanda or anyone else said, I had to finish what I started. It felt less like a talent show and more like a trial of character. And deep down, I knew the jacket wasn't done with me yet. Because sometimes the things we try hardest to shed find ways of testing us again. The flyer for the regional showcase sat crumpled in my backpack for 2 days before I dared to smooth it out and pin it to my wall. The bold letters seemed to glare at me. Auditions this Saturday. Open to all. I practiced in secret, the way I always had. My room became both sanctuary and battlefield. Every time I hit a wrong note, Amanda's words echoed in my head. Every time I sang clearly, I imagined the audience rising again, the way they had that night when I shed my jacket. But rehearsing alone is different from being tested in the open. And that test came sooner than I expected. On Wednesday, during lunch, a group of students approached my table. Usually, I ate alone. That day, there were 5 of them. They weren't cruel, but their presence was unsettling, like spotlights where I wanted shadows. One of them, a boy named Chris who played guitar in the school band, leaned across the table and said, "We were talking, and we want you to sing with us at the showcase." It sounded like kindness, but it carried a puzzle. Was this an opportunity or a trap? I saw Amanda sitting a few tables away, her smile sharp as a blade. She was watching, waiting. "Why me?" I asked, wary. "Because you've got a voice," Chris said simply. "And because when you sang the other night, it felt real. Not polished, not fake. Just real." It was tempting. Joining a group meant safety in numbers. But it also meant surrendering some control, singing their songs, following their rules, letting them shape how I was seen. Was that courage, or was it another way of hiding? That night, I pulled the gray jacket from under my bed. I held it in my lap, the fabric worn soft from years of use. It smelled faintly of laundry soap and old dust. I thought about how safe it had once made me feel. Then I thought about the way the audience had stood when I let it fall. Another puzzle presented itself. Should I join the band and blend in, or should I risk stepping out alone again? The decision wasn't just about music, it was about identity. About whether I would keep letting others decide how much of me the world got to see. And somewhere in that gray fabric, I felt the weight of a riddle I hadn't solved yet. Was the jacket protecting me from the world, Or was it keeping me from discovering who I really was? Sometimes the greatest puzzles aren't made of pieces, they're made of choices. The morning of the audition arrived with the kind of stillness that feels heavier than noise. My alarm clock blinked 7 o'clock, but I had already been awake for hours, lying in the half-dark, staring at the jacket draped over my desk chair. I had made my choice. I wasn't joining the band. I was going to sing alone. It wasn't because I distrusted Chris or the others. Part of me believed they meant well. But I realized that if I stepped on that stage with them, it would always leave a question in my mind. Was it their music that carried me, or mine? I needed to know if I could stand on my own feet, without the armor of the jacket, without anyone else holding me up. The audition hall was larger than our school auditorium, with rows of plastic chairs and a wide wooden stage that looked more intimidating in daylight. Parents, teachers, and hopeful performers filled the space with nervous chatter. I clutched the edges of my sheet music, my palms damp, my heart beating unevenly. When my name was called, I walked forward. The stage creaked beneath me, loud in the silence. I set the jacket on the back of a chair off to the side. For the first time, I left it behind willingly. And then something happened. As I began to sing, I didn't just hear my voice. I heard the truth inside it. The melody wasn't just notes. It was every moment I had hidden, every insult I had swallowed, every night I had practiced in secret. The song carried my history, my scars, my longing to be seen. I could see the judges leaning in. One of them even closed her eyes, as if to feel the music more deeply. I didn't need applause to know it. I had moved them. But the revelation came not from the judges or the audience. It came from within me. Halfway through the song, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in my life, I wasn't performing to prove someone wrong.
I was singing because it was mine to sing.
When the final note faded, there was silence. Pure, weighty silence. And in that moment, I understood. The jacket had never been my protection. It had been my prison. Walking off the stage, I left it behind on the chair. I didn't know if I'd ever wear it again. Sometimes the moment that terrifies us most turns out to be the one that sets us free. Freedom, I learned quickly, doesn't come without a cost. When the audition results were posted the following week, my name was on the list. I had made it. Out of dozens of students from across the county, I was one of the few chosen to perform at the regional showcase. For a moment, I felt the swell of triumph. But almost as quickly, the ripples of resistance began. Amanda wasted no time. Of course she got in, she scoffed in the cafeteria. They probably just felt sorry for her again. Judges always do that, pick a charity case to look good. Her words slid into ears eager for gossip, and soon enough, the whispers returned, not as cruel jokes but as doubts. Was I talented, or was I a pity story? The hardest part wasn't the rumors. It was how they wormed their way into my own mind. At night, as I rehearsed, I found myself hesitating, second-guessing. Each note felt like a question mark. Was I truly good, or just tolerated? Then came the complication I hadn't expected. Chris, the guitarist, found me after class one day. "We're still putting together our set," he said. "We'd really like you to join us. It would help you. Help me." The phrase struck me like a cold splash of water. Did he mean it kindly, or was it another way of saying I wasn't enough on my own? And yet, there was temptation in the offer. Performing with the band could shield me from Amanda's sneers, could silence the whispers. If the performance went well, no one could say it was only pity applause. But deep down, I knew the trade-off: safety for silence. At home, the gray jacket still sat folded at the foot of my bed. I hadn't worn it since the audition, but it lingered there like a shadow. One night, in a moment of weakness, I slipped it back on. The fabric hugged me, familiar and heavy. It whispered of safety, but it also reminded me of the cost of hiding. The showcase was only 2 weeks away, and I stood at a crossroads. If I walked on stage with the band, I might silence the doubts. If I walked on alone, I risked proving Amanda right. Either way, the jacket was still testing me. Sometimes the most dangerous complications don't come from enemies. They come from the choices that promise comfort. The night of the regional showcase arrived with the kind of tension that settles into your bones. The auditorium was packed, bigger than anything I had ever seen. The air hummed with anticipation, families with cameras, performers pacing backstage, judges in their neat rows with pens poised. I sat in the wings, my hands curled around the jacket I had promised myself I wouldn't wear again. I hadn't meant to bring it, but at the last minute I couldn't leave it at home. It felt like an anchor I wasn't ready to throw away. Chris and his band walked past, guitars slung over their shoulders, hair slicked back like they belonged on magazine covers. "Last chance," he said, almost casually. "Come sing with us. You'll be safer."
Safer.
The word echoed. I thought of Amanda, already in the front row with her friends, her phone angled to record every second of my performance. I knew what she was waiting for. A stumble, a crack in my voice, anything she could twist into proof that I didn't belong there. Part of me wanted desperately to take Chris's offer, to vanish into the harmony of a group where my voice could hide. But then I thought about the moment in the audition hall, when I had realized I wasn't afraid. That moment had been mine, and mine alone. When my name was called, my legs felt like stone. I walked onto the stage, jacket still in my hand, its weight pulling at me. The audience was a blur of faces, the lights blinding. I could hear the rustle of programs, the whisper of expectation. I stood there, frozen, for what felt like a lifetime. My throat tightened. My mind screamed, "Put the jacket back on. Walk away.
Hide."
But then I saw a boy in the third row, someone I didn't know, lean forward, eyes wide, waiting. Not for perfection. Not for spectacle. Just waiting.
Hoping.
And I realized this wasn't about Amanda. It wasn't about pity or approval. It wasn't even about the judges. It was about whether I would let the jacket roll me again.
So I set it down.
Slowly, deliberately, I placed the gray jacket on the edge of the stage. For a heartbeat, the room was silent, as if holding its breath. Then I began to sing. And in that moment, the confrontation wasn't between me and Amanda, or me and the crowd. It was between me and the part of myself that still believed I was too ugly to be seen. Sometimes the fiercest battle isn't with others. It's with the voice inside that tells us to stay small. The song I chose wasn't flashy. It wasn't the kind of number that made people clap along or cheer halfway through. It was slow, steady, full of words that had once comforted me when no one else's voice did. Every note felt like a thread, stitching together the parts of me I had tried so hard to hide. Halfway through, I saw movement in the front row. Amanda leaned back in her seat, rolling her eyes as if to say, "See? Nothing special." For a second, my confidence wavered. But then something else happened, something I'll never forget. One by one, people in the audience began to rise. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a mother holding her child a little tighter as she stood, then an older man in a suit straightening his back. And then another and another. By the time I reached the final chorus, the entire auditorium was on its feet. It wasn't applause yet. It was something quieter, more reverent. They weren't standing for me, they were standing with me, as if they recognized the battle I had fought just to stand there at all. When the last note lingered in the air, the silence broke like a wave. The applause was thunderous, rolling through the hall, drowning out every cruel whisper I had ever heard. I bowed, my vision blurred with tears, and when I lifted my head again, I saw Amanda still seated. She looked small somehow, smaller than I had ever seen her. But the truth is, it didn't matter anymore. Because I had learned something in that moment. The jacket had never been the enemy, and neither had Amanda. The real enemy was the belief that I wasn't worthy of being seen. That night, I didn't take the jacket home. As the crowd filed out, I left it folded neatly on the edge of the stage, like shedding a skin I no longer needed. I walked out lighter, freer, carrying only the sound of voices that had once risen against me, but had now risen with me. The legacy of that night wasn't a trophy or a ribbon. It was a lesson etched into my soul, that beauty isn't measured by the approval of others, but by the courage it takes to step into the light, even when the world says you don't belong there. Sometimes the greatest transformation begins the moment you stop hiding. It has been years since that night, yet I can still feel the heat of the lights on my face and the way the jacket's fabric slipped from my hands for the last time. I never put it back on. In fact, I never saw it again. But I don't need it anymore. People sometimes ask me if I ever confronted Amanda, if I threw her words back at her once I had proven myself. The truth is I didn't, because by then, her words no longer mattered. They were just echoes from a life I had already stepped out of. I had learned that vindication doesn't come from humiliating others. It comes from living fully, freely, without apology. That night at the showcase, I didn't win first place. A pair of dancers with breathtaking energy took the trophy. But when I walked off that stage, I knew I had won something far greater. I had won myself. I had learned that the world might try to label you, to tell you where you don't belong, but only you can decide whether to shrink or to stand. The legacy of that jacket still follows me, but now it's a reminder, not a burden. A reminder that fear can feel like safety, but it is only when we let go of it that life truly begins. And so I tell you, as I tell myself whenever doubt comes creeping back, you are not too ugly, too awkward, too small, too anything. You are enough, exactly as you are. The world may whisper otherwise, but your courage will always speak louder. So if there's something you've been hiding, something you've been waiting for the perfect moment to reveal, don't wait. Step into the light. Let them see you. Because sometimes the bravest act is as simple and as powerful as taking off your jacket.